The roses had never looked more beautiful, and Marcus Hale had never felt more alone. He sat in the center of his 3-acre garden on a Tuesday morning in late September, the kind of morning that smelled like dying summer and arriving autumn all at once. That bittersweet combination of warm sun and cooling air that most people described out loud to whoever happened to be standing next to them. Marcus never did that. He had no one standing next to him, and even if he had, words had never been his way of moving through the world. Not spoken ones, anyway. At 33 years old, Marcus Hale was worth approximately $4.2 billion. He had built his fortune from nothing, from a small apartment in Cincinnati where he'd grown up the only deaf child of 2 hearing parents who loved him fiercely but never quite learned to reach him. Through sheer force of will, an extraordinary mind for technology, and a company called Silent Wave that had revolutionized digital communication accessibility worldwide. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had changed the way the world communicated with its deaf and hard-of-hearing population. He had won awards for it. He had been on the cover of Forbes and Time. He had shaken the hands of senators and sat across from presidents, all of it conducted through interpreters whose presence at his side had always felt, no matter how professional or kind, like a reminder of the wall between him and everyone else. The garden was his. Not the house. The house was enormous and cold and full of expensive furniture that his interior designer had chosen and that Marcus had approved with a shrug because he genuinely didn't care about furniture. But the garden was different. The garden he had designed himself, working with a landscape architect through long sessions of written notes and careful sketches, insisting on certain flowers and rejecting others, spending hours choosing the placement of each stone path and each wooden bench. The garden was the one place where being unable to hear didn't feel like absence. Birds he couldn't hear still landed on the bird bath. Wind he couldn't hear still moved through the lavender and bent it in silver waves. Beauty, he had always believed, didn't require sound to exist. He came here every morning when the weather permitted. He drank his coffee, always black, always too hot, from a white ceramic mug that he held with both hands, and he watched the garden the way other people might listen to music. The groundskeepers knew to arrive after 9. The household staff knew that the garden before 9 belonged to Marcus alone. This was the one rule he enforced without exception or apology. It had been 3 weeks since his previous housekeeper, Mrs. Delgado, had retired after 12 years of service. 3 weeks since his household had undergone the particular disruption of transition, new faces, adjusted schedules, the subtle awkwardness of people learning how to work for a man who communicated primarily through a notepad app on his phone, or through Amara, his full-time ASL interpreter who was present for meetings and calls but not, by Marcus's own choice, for his private mornings. The new staff had been arranged through an agency. He had not met all of them yet. This was not unusual. Marcus ran his household the way he ran his company, through systems, through trusted managers, through written protocols. The personal, the intimate, the human texture of daily life. These things had a way of slipping through the orderly machinery of his existence, and he had long since made a kind of peace with that. He was on his 2nd cup of coffee, reading through a proposal on his tablet, when he saw the movement in his peripheral vision. It came from near the rose arbor at the eastern edge of the garden, where a narrow gate connected to the service path that ran alongside the house. The gate was usually kept closed. It was open now, and through it had come something unexpected, a small figure, barely reaching the lower crossbeam of the gate itself, dressed in yellow. A child. She was perhaps 2 or 3 years old, with dark curly hair pulled into 2 uneven pigtails, wearing a yellow sundress with white daisies on it and small white sneakers that were already slightly dirty from the grass. She had apparently wandered through the gate from the service path and now stood at the edge of the garden with a particular combination of wonder and absolute confidence that belongs exclusively to toddlers discovering a new world. Her mouth was moving. She was saying something, singing perhaps, to herself, and she was looking at the flowers with enormous dark eyes. Marcus lowered his tablet. He watched her the way you watch something that has appeared in a dream, slightly unsure of its realness, reluctant to move in case the movement breaks the spell. She toddled forward a few steps, her small sneakers navigating the stone path with tremendous seriousness, arms slightly raised for balance. She stopped at a cluster of yellow marigolds that bordered the path and bent forward from the waist, her entire small body tilting toward them, nose nearly touching the petals. Then she straightened up, and she turned, and she saw him. Most children, upon suddenly discovering a large, quiet, unsmiling adult stranger in the middle of an unfamiliar garden, would react with alarm. They would run back toward the gate, or freeze, or cry. This child did none of those things. She looked at Marcus with a calm, frank curiosity that was almost unsettling in its directness. She tilted her head slightly to the left, studying him. He was aware, suddenly, of how still he had gone, coffee mug raised halfway to his mouth, completely suspended, staring at this tiny stranger in yellow. Then something happened that Marcus would later describe, in the rare private journal he kept on an encrypted app, as the moment his life divided into before and after. The little girl raised her small hands, and she signed. Her fingers were chubby and imprecise. The signs formed with a slightly approximate quality of a very young child still developing motor control, but they were unmistakable. Marcus had been reading ASL since he was 4 years old. He could read it in the hands of experts and beginners alike. He could read it, it turned out, in the hands of a 3-year-old in a yellow sundress in the middle of his private garden on a Tuesday morning in September. What she signed was this: "Can I be your friend?" Marcus Hale, who had not cried in front of another living person since his college graduation, when his mother had wept and signed "I'm so proud of you," and he had wept back, felt the sharp, sudden sting of tears behind his eyes. He sat there for one long, suspended moment, the garden silent around him in the way it was always silent for him, the morning sun warm on his hands, the half-raised coffee cup forgotten, and looked at this child who had walked through his gate and, without hesitation, without awkwardness, without the careful overpronunciation or the apologetic miming that hearing people so often defaulted to in his presence, had simply spoken to him, in his language, in the first language he had ever known. He set down the coffee mug very carefully on the bench beside him. And then Marcus Hale did something he almost never did in the presence of another person. He smiled, and with hands that were, for the first time in a long time, trembling slightly, he signed back, "Yes, I would like that very much." Her name, he would learn, was Lily. Lily Rosario, 3 years and 4 months old, born in a county hospital in Phoenix on a May morning during a rainstorm, named after the flower her mother had been thinking about planting in the small pot on their apartment balcony that spring. She had her mother's dark curly hair and her mother's dark eyes and, as Marcus would come to discover over the following weeks, her mother's complete and utter inability to be intimidated by anything. The mother arrived approximately 45 seconds after Lily had settled herself, uninvited but with absolute confidence, onto the garden bench beside Marcus, close enough that her small yellow-clad shoulder was nearly touching his arm, and began pointing at flowers and signing their colors with the cheerful authority of someone conducting a tour. She came through the gate the same way Lily had come, except she came through it at something close to a run, her dark hair escaping from a practical bun at the back of her neck, her face flushed with a combination of exertion and what Marcus recognized, even from 20 feet away, as the particular terror of a parent who has looked away for 30 seconds and discovered their toddler has vanished. She was wearing a light gray uniform, the household staff uniform from the agency, the same one Mrs. Delgado had worn, and she was also, Marcus noticed with the observational precision that came from a lifetime of reading faces rather than voices, extraordinarily beautiful, not in a way she seemed to be aware of. Beautiful in the way that certain people are when they are entirely focused on something else, when they're not performing or presenting but simply being, animated by feeling, unguarded, real. She stopped when she saw them. Her eyes went from Lily, sitting calmly on the bench, still conducting her flower-color lecture, to Marcus, who was watching her approach with an expression he was aware might look unsettling to someone who didn't know him, because Marcus's face in repose had a stillness that strangers often read as severity or displeasure, and that was, in fact, simply the face of a man who had learned very early to hold himself quietly in a noisy world that wasn't built for him. She sighed. That was the second thing that astonished him. She didn't grab her phone and type something. She didn't mouth exaggerated words at him. She signed, quickly and fluently, and what she signed was, "I am so sorry." She slipped away from me. "I hope she didn't disturb you. Lily, come here right now, please." Lily, for the record, did not come there right now. Lily continued her tour. Marcus stood. He was tall, 6'2", and he was aware that his height combined with his habitual stillness could read as imposing, so he made a conscious effort to soften his posture as he signed back, "She wasn't disturbing me. Please don't be upset." Something shifted in the woman's face. Not quite relaxation. There was still the professional anxiety of a new employee who has committed what she clearly considered a significant error on what was, he realized, probably her first week, but something adjacent to relief. She looked at him more directly, and he saw in her eyes the thing he always looked for when meeting someone new who knew ASL. Not sympathy, not the well-meaning but slightly pitying warmth that hearing people who supported the deaf community sometimes brought to their signing, but simple, natural communication. The same way anyone looks at anyone when they're just talking. She signed, "I'm Elena Rosario. I started Monday. I clean the East Wing, and I help with the kitchen in the mornings." "I'm so sorry. The gate was supposed to be—" Marcus interrupted, which he rarely did, because he was already signing. "I know who you are. Mrs. Patterson mentioned you. How does your daughter know ASL?" Elena glanced at Lily, who had moved on from flowers and was now signing something to a butterfly that had landed on the lavender, a story of some kind, elaborate, accompanied by wide eyes and dramatic hand gestures. A small smile moved across Elena's face before she could stop it. Then she looked back at Marcus and signed, "Lily's best friend at daycare is a little boy named Tomas. His whole family is deaf. Lily decided she was going to learn to talk to him, so she watched videos on my phone for 3 months. She knows maybe 50 signs. 60 if you count the ones she invented herself." Marcus looked at Lily. Then he looked at Elena. Then he looked back at Lily, who had apparently concluded her butterfly story and was now looking up at a passing cloud with deep philosophical consideration. He signed, "The sign she used when she found me. Can I be your friend?" Where did she learn that one? Elena's expression changed. It was subtle, a slight softening around the eyes, a quick compression of the lips, as if she was holding something in, and she looked at her daughter for a moment before she signed back. "She asks everyone that. Every single person she meets. The mailman, the woman at the grocery checkout, the doctor at her checkup. She decided a long time ago that it's the most important thing you can say to someone." Marcus stood in the middle of his garden in the morning light, in the silence that had been his companion for 33 years, and felt something turn over in his chest, slow and deep, like a stone rolling aside from a place where it had rested so long he had forgotten it was there. He turned to Lily and signed, "Lily." She turned immediately, completely unsurprised by the fact that he knew her name. "Yes. Would you like to see the fountain?" Her face broke open into a smile of such complete and uncomplicated joy that Marcus Hale had to look away for a moment, out at the marigolds, at the lavender, at the garden he had built for silence, while something happened in his chest that he didn't have a word for in any language. "Yes, please," Lily signed. And she reached up and took his hand. Elena watched her billionaire employer walk her 3-year-old daughter toward the stone fountain at the center of the garden, and she pressed her fingers briefly to her mouth, and she breathed. Nobody planned it. That was the thing Marcus kept returning to in the weeks that followed, the absolute accidental nature of how it began, how a left-open gate and a toddler's complete disregard for property boundaries had rearranged something in the architecture of his days. The second Tuesday, Elena had knocked on the glass of the garden door at 8:45, holding Lily's hand, and signed, "She has been asking since Sunday if it is Tuesday yet." Her expression was carefully neutral, professionally appropriate, but her eyes were uncertain in a way that Marcus recognized. It was the look of someone extending something fragile, something they were already preparing to withdraw if necessary. Marcus had opened the door and stepped aside. That was how it became a ritual. Tuesday mornings before 9, before the groundskeepers arrived and the household machinery of the day started up. Elena brought Lily to the garden, and Lily taught Marcus things. This was genuinely how it felt, not as though Marcus were the experienced adult graciously spending time with a small child, but as though Lily, with the complete authority of someone who has recently arrived in the world and found it primarily fascinating, had taken it upon herself to ensure that Marcus was properly educated about it. She taught him, over successive Tuesdays, that the butterflies liked the lavender best in the morning and the coneflowers best in the afternoon. She taught him that clouds had personalities, that one is grumpy, that one is sleepy, that one is running, and she taught him this in a delightful mixture of ASL signs and invented gestures and the kind of deeply serious facial expressions that toddlers deploy when discussing matters of great cosmological importance. She taught him that the stone frog at the edge of the fountain had a name, Gerald, and that Gerald was sad on days when it was overcast because he preferred the sunshine, and that it was important to sign good morning to Gerald even if you felt a little silly doing it. Marcus signed good morning to Gerald. He did not feel silly. He felt, in a way he couldn't entirely explain, like a person waking up from a long and not unpleasant sleep to find the world slightly more vivid and specific than he'd remembered it being. Elena sat on the bench each Tuesday, close enough to intervene if Lily required intervention, far enough to allow the strange, quiet friendship that was unfolding between her daughter and her employer to be its own thing. She brought her own coffee in a travel mug. She had stopped apologizing for this after the second week, when Marcus had specifically asked her not to apologize for it, and she watched, and sometimes she and Marcus talked. The talking was slow at first. The way signing with someone new is always slow while you calibrate to their pace and their vocabulary and their particular habits of expression. Elena had learned ASL in her mid-20s, she told him, primarily self-taught through online resources after Lily took up with Tomas and his family, and Elena had decided she was not going to be the mother who couldn't talk to her own child's closest friend. Her ASL was fluent, but carried the slight hesitation of someone who'd learned it through effort rather than immersion, and she sometimes paused mid-sentence to find a sign, her eyes going briefly inward in a way that Marcus found. He noticed this with some surprise. Completely charming. He learned things about her, piece by piece. The way you learn things about a person when your conversations are conducted in a language that requires presence, eye contact, the full engagement of your body. She had grown up in Tucson, the eldest of 4 children, raised largely by her grandmother after her parents' divorce. She had wanted to be a nurse, had started the program at Arizona State, had gotten pregnant with Lily at 24 during her second year in a relationship that had not survived the news. She had finished one more semester before the economics of single parenthood had made finishing impossible. She had moved to Connecticut 6 months ago for reasons she described only as a fresh start, which Marcus did not press, recognizing the particular quality of silence around that phrase. She was 28 years old. She was raising her daughter alone in a one-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from his estate, getting Lily to daycare and herself to work and managing both on a schedule that Marcus, who was used to the logistics of running a large organization, recognized as requiring a kind of daily logistical precision and physical endurance that most people would find unsustainable. She did not complain about it. Not once. This was not, he thought, because she was performing stoicism. It was because she had made a fundamental decision somewhere along the way to aim her energy at what was workable rather than what was hard. He admired this. He found, actually, that he admired her in a way that accumulated gradually over those Tuesday mornings. Not the sudden, blinding recognition of movies, but something quieter and more structural, like realizing that a particular piece of music has been playing in the background of your day and has been making everything slightly better without your quite noticing it. On the fourth Tuesday, Lily fell asleep on the bench between them, having exhausted herself in an extensive signed conversation with a robin that had landed nearby. She was simply there, conscious, and then she was simply not, curled on her side with her cheek on her hands, her mouth slightly open, her dark lashes fanned against her cheeks. Elena and Marcus sat in the quiet garden and looked at the sleeping child between them and did not sign anything for a while. There was no need to. The silence was simply the garden doing what the garden did, holding them in it, unhurried, undemanding. Then Elena signed, carefully, as though she had been deciding whether to say it. She lost her hearing in her left ear last year. Ear infection that went too long without treatment. My insurance at the time, it's fine now. She has some hearing in the right. But the doctor says she may lose more over time. Marcus was very still. Elena continued. She doesn't know yet. She's too young to understand. But I've been teaching her ASL since we found out. Not just for Tomas anymore. I want her to have a language that is completely hers. One that will never. She paused, her hands suspended. Then, I never want her to feel like the world wasn't built for her. Marcus looked at Elena for a long moment. Then he looked at Lily, sleeping between them with absolute peace, her small chest rising and falling. Then he signed slowly. She won't. Not if you keep being her mother. Elena looked at him. Her eyes were bright. She looked away at the garden, and Marcus looked away at the garden, and the robin hopped once on the path and then was gone. October arrived, and with it the particular social obligations that Marcus's financial standing made unavoidable. There was a gala for a children's hospital foundation. He sat on the board, and 2 investor dinners and a tech conference in Boston where he was a keynote speaker, none of which he would have chosen and all of which he attended in the armor of his success, impeccably dressed, Amara at his side, his face in the mode he'd spent decades perfecting, attentive, composed, unreachable. He was good at events. This surprised people who expected a reclusive deaf billionaire to be visibly uncomfortable in social situations. Marcus had learned long ago that the events themselves were manageable. It was the margins that wore him down, the cocktail hour conversations where hearing people talked over each other and forgot he was there, the dinners where someone inevitably spoke to Amara rather than to him even while discussing his own company, the small and mostly unintentional exclusions that accumulated over an evening like water finding cracks. He came home from the Boston conference on a Thursday evening to a house that was very quiet and very clean and very empty in the way it always was. The staff had gone for the day. The lights were on their automated evening setting. The whole enormous house arranged around his absence and adjusted to his return with mechanical precision. He stood in the foyer for a moment, his bag at his feet, and felt the particular weight of the word home not quite applying. Then he saw the envelope on the hall table. It was a standard white envelope with Marcus written on the front in large, careful capital letters, a child's handwriting, which meant it had been written by an adult for a child. He opened it. Inside was a drawing in crayon. A garden, unmistakably green grass, round blobs that were clearly meant to be flowers, a blue oval that was the fountain. 2 figures sat on a bench, one large, one very small. The large figure had no particular features except a serious, straight-line mouth. The small figure was wearing yellow and had what appeared to be extremely enthusiastic hair. Above both figures, in the yellow crayon, was a sun with approximately 15 rays. Below the drawing, in Elena's handwriting, Lily asked me to bring this. She said she wanted you to have the garden with you when you weren't here. She called it so Marcus doesn't feel lonely when he's away. And below that, in the same careful large capital letters from the front of the envelope, Lily's own hand, the letters lurching and enormous and absolutely earnest. Your friend Lily. Marcus stood in his empty foyer on a Thursday evening in October, still in his coat, holding a crayon drawing made by a 3-year-old, and the wall that he had built, that careful, meticulous, structurally necessary wall, developed a crack so sudden and so complete that he felt it as a physical thing, a loosening in his ribs, a shift of pressure. He carried the drawing upstairs. He put it on the nightstand beside his bed. He lay there that night looking at the crayon sun with its 15 rays and thought about a little girl who had decided that what a person needed when they went away to a lonely conference was to carry their garden with them. The following Tuesday, he was in the garden before 8:30. When Elena came through the gate with Lily at 8:55, Lily already in motion, already signing something before she'd fully cleared the gate, Marcus was at the bench with 2 coffees in white ceramic mugs and a small cup of apple juice in a child's cup with a lid, which he had asked Mrs. Patterson to have ready, and which he had carried out himself. Elena stopped walking when she saw the 3 cups on the bench. She looked at Marcus. He signed, I got your note. I wanted to say thank you properly. Elena signed. It was Lily's idea. Marcus signed. I know. I want to say thank you to her too. But I'm saying it to you because he paused. Because you're raising someone who knows that other people might feel lonely when they're away. That doesn't happen by accident. Elena looked at him for a long moment with those dark, direct eyes. Then she sat down and picked up the coffee mug, and Lily scrambled up between them and grabbed the apple juice with both hands, and the garden held them again in its morning quiet. That was the Tuesday that something changed between them, though neither of them named it. It was a shift in the quality of the air, the way certain pieces of music shift from major to minor, or minor to major, something technically imperceptible that nonetheless changes everything about how you feel inside the sound. He started to know things about her. That she took her coffee with oat milk but never complained when there was only regular milk, that she had a habit of tucking her left knee up onto the bench when she was listening to something intently, that her signing slowed down and became more precise when she was saying something that mattered to her, as though she was giving the words the weight they deserved. He knew that she smiled before she laughed, that the smile lasted about a second and was small and involuntary, and that the laugh, when it came, was surprised, like she hadn't expected to find something funny, and was delighted by the betrayal. He started to think about her on days that weren't Tuesday. This was new. This was if he was being honest with himself, which Marcus generally was, though he preferred to conduct his honesty in private. Alarming. November came in cold and certain, and with it the end of outdoor garden mornings for the season. Marcus had the conservatory opened, a glass and iron structure attached to the east side of the house that he had never used because he had built it for the person he thought he might someday share his life with, and had subsequently, when that life remained stubbornly unshared, kept closed and empty rather than inhabited alone, because the conservatory full of winter plants was somehow more painful than the conservatory empty. He told Elena about this on the last outdoor Tuesday of October, when the air had gone sharp enough that Lily was wearing a small red coat and had complained at length in ASL about the cold, directing her complaints primarily at Gerald the stone frog, who was stoically unsympathetic. Marcus had told Elena, "I have a conservatory. If you and Lily want to continue Tuesdays inside this winter, you're welcome to use it." Elena had looked at him carefully. That direct, assessing look she had that Marcus had come to respect for its complete absence of performance, and signed, "You don't have to do that." And Marcus had signed back, honestly, because by this point he had stopped performing with her. "I know. I want to." The conservatory, once opened and heated, was full of the ghost shapes of plants that hadn't been tended in 2 years. Some had survived, leggy and reaching, others had long since gone dry and would need to be replaced. Elena, without being asked, began tending them. She brought Lily on a Wednesday afternoon when she was working in the East Wing and spent an hour pruning and watering and generally restoring order. When Marcus happened to pass the conservatory door and see them, Elena kneeling by a neglected ficus, Lily crouched beside her being handed small clippings to deposit in the compost bucket with tremendous official importance. He stood in the doorway for a moment and felt, so strongly it almost frightened him, that he was looking at something he had been missing for a very long time and had stopped knowing he was missing. He knocked on the glass of the open door. Elena looked up. He signed, "You don't have to do this." She signed back, with a small version of that pre-laugh smile. "I know." He began to understand, around this time, that he was in serious trouble. The nature of his life made certain things complicated in ways that would not have been complicated for other people. He was her employer. The dynamic was real and the responsibility of it was real, and Marcus, who had spent his life being very deliberate about things that mattered, turned this over with care. He did not want her to feel any obligation, any pressure, anything that shaded the particular quality of ease that had developed between them and that he valued more than he could easily sign. He also understood, from the things she had not said, the carefully minimal references to Lily's father, the fresh start that had brought her to Connecticut, the particular self-reliance that was both strength and protective armor, that Elena Rosario had her own complicated history with trust, and that whatever he did with what he felt, he needed to do it with tremendous care. He almost did nothing. There was a week in early November when he made a deliberate decision to restructure things, to be more formal, more employerly, to let the Tuesday mornings quietly conclude. He had composed, in his head, a careful note explaining that the household schedule was changing, that he hoped she and Lily were well. He had not sent it. He had not sent it because on that same Tuesday morning Lily had climbed into his lap without any preamble whatsoever, simply selected his lap as the appropriate location and installed herself in it, and had taken his large hand in her 2 small ones and carefully, deliberately signed each of his fingers as though she were playing a piano, and then looked up at him with complete satisfaction and signed, "Your hands are big." He had signed, "Yes." She had signed, "Mine are small." He had signed, "Yes." She had thought about this, looking at their hands together, and then signed, "That's okay. Small hands can still say big things." Marcus had sat very still for a moment with Lily in his lap, and his throat doing something complicated, and his carefully composed note dissolving into nothing. He spoke to Amara, his interpreter, in early November, one of the few people he trusted in the full sense of the word, a woman who had worked with him for 7 years and who knew him well enough to not fill silences he needed to keep. He told her, through signs, what he was feeling, and she listened, and when he was done she signed back, "What are you afraid of?" He thought about it honestly. Then he signed, "That I am her employer, and she will feel she has no choice. That she will say yes when she means something more complicated. That I will ruin what exists, which is already, he paused, which is already more than I expected to have. Amara signed. And if you say nothing? He didn't answer, because the answer was something he had already lived for 33 years. The garden, quiet, beautiful, and empty. He wrote her a letter. An actual letter, on paper, in pen. He was a precise and careful writer, had always found written language the most spacious and exact container for things that mattered. And he wrote it over 3 evenings, drafting and redrafting, and what it said, in full, was this. Elena, I am aware that I am your employer, and I want you to know, first, that nothing changes in your position or Lily's welcome in this house regardless of how you receive this. I want to say something, and I need to say it in a way that gives you every possible space to receive it as you choose, with no expectation and no pressure. Your daughter walked through my gate in September and signed, "Can I be your friend?" And I think you should know that before that morning I had been sitting in that garden every day for 3 years, and I had not thought of it as lonely because I had stopped remembering what not lonely felt like. Lily reminded me, and so did you. I am 33 years old, and I have been careful my whole life, and careful has kept me safe, and it has also kept me alone, and I am at a point where I would like to be less careful about this specific thing. I would like, if you are willing, to take you to dinner. Just dinner. And I would like to know you outside of Tuesday mornings, if you'll let me. If you won't, I understand completely, and I hope you will believe me when I say that this changes nothing, not your work, not Lily's Tuesdays, not the conservatory plants that you have apparently decided to rescue whether I asked you to or not. You owe me no answer except the true one. Marcus. He left it on the kitchen counter on a Wednesday morning before she arrived, under her coffee mug. And then he went to the garden and stood there in the November cold without his coat, looking at Gerald the stone frog, who looked back with his usual stoicism. It was 20 minutes before he felt the tap on his shoulder. He turned. Elena was standing behind him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, holding the letter. She looked at him for a long moment with those dark eyes that he had spent months learning to read. Then she signed, slowly and deliberately, giving each word its full weight. I would like that very much. It was what he had signed to Lily, in September, when she'd asked to be his friend. He understood that this was not an accident. December arrived in a blizzard that buried the garden under 2 feet of snow and made Gerald the frog invisible and turned the conservatory into the warmest and most essential room in the house. Elena had, by this point, filled it with rescued plants and a few new ones, and it smelled of green growing things and the bergamot candle she'd started keeping on the potting shelf because she liked the smell, and Marcus had stopped thinking of it as the room he'd built for a life that hadn't happened and started thinking of it as the room where his life was happening now. They had dinner, the first time, at a small Italian restaurant in New Haven that had been recommended by Amara and that had a corner booth and low lighting and a staff that was unimpressed by wealth in the particular way that old, excellent restaurants are unimpressed by wealth. Amara came, as she always did for occasions requiring real-time interpretation, and Marcus had been mildly anxious about this, about the 3-person dynamic, about whether Elena would find it awkward to speak while a third person rendered everything into signs. But Elena, characteristically, had resolved this anxiety by spending the first 10 minutes of dinner asking Amara questions about herself with such genuine interest that by the time they ordered, Amara had a glass of wine and the comfortable posture of someone who had been invited to a dinner rather than hired for one. Elena was, it turned out, extraordinary in the specific way that doesn't announce itself. She was funny, not in a performed way, not trying to be funny, but with the offhand, observational humor of someone who watches the world with affection and finds it frequently absurd. She was opinionated about things Marcus had no opinions about, and had no opinions about things Marcus had strong opinions about, and the asymmetry of this was not a problem but a pleasure, each of them genuinely interested in the other's perspective, neither of them performing agreement they didn't feel. She told him more about Lily's hearing over the soup course, more than she had in the garden that October morning, more specific, the facts and the fears laid out with a kind of careful courage that Marcus recognized because he had seen his mother deploy the same courage when discussing his own hearing as a child. The projection was not good. Lily would likely be fully deaf by adolescence. Elena had been given this information at a follow-up appointment in October and had spent 3 weeks processing it alone before she told him, and the fact that she was telling him now, this specific him, at this specific dinner, was not lost on Marcus. He signed through Amara. She will be okay. Better than okay. Elena looked at him directly. How do you know? He signed, because she already knows that small hands can say big things. And because her mother has been giving her a language since before she even knew she'd need it. That's not fear. That's love with direction. Elena looked at him for a moment, and then she pressed her lips together and looked at the table, and Marcus let the silence be what it was, not empty, not requiring filling, just the space in which a person absorbs something they needed to hear. Lily, who was home with Mrs. Patterson that evening, had given Elena a commissioned message to deliver. Tell Marcus that Gerald probably misses him. Elena delivered this message over dessert with perfect solemnity. Marcus, for the second time in Amara's 7 years of working with him, cried in front of another person. It lasted approximately 4 seconds, and he would deny it forever after, but Elena saw it, and she reached across the table and put her hand briefly over his, and that was the moment. Marcus understood that whatever careful, limited, protected version of a life he'd been living was over, and that he was not even slightly sorry. Christmas came, and with it something Marcus had never had in this house: noise. Not audible noise. He remained, as he had always been, in his own profound and now familiar quiet, but the visual and physical noise of celebration, of a child discovering a snow-covered garden for the first time and signing snow, snow, snow with both hands raised and her entire body vibrating with joy. Of the conservatory decorated with lights that Elena had put up one afternoon with Lily contributing supervision and occasional conflicting opinions about placement, of Mrs. Patterson baking things and the kitchen smelling of cinnamon and the table being set for more than one. On Christmas morning, Lily gave Marcus a present she had made herself, a clay handprint, small and slightly lopsided, with her name pressed into the bottom in stamp letters. Below the name, in Elena's handwriting, "For your garden, when it wakes up in spring." He put it on the windowsill of his study, where he could see it from his desk. The new year was cold and clear, and on the first Tuesday of January, in the conservatory among Elena's rescued plants, Lily taught Marcus a sign she'd invented herself, both hands curved, brought together, held against the chest. She performed it for him with great ceremony and then looked at him expectantly. He signed. What does that one mean? She signed. It means this. And she gestured, with one small hand, at the three of them, at Marcus, at Elena, at herself, encompassing the conservatory, the garden sleeping under snow outside, the house, all of it. Then she made the sign again, both hands curved, brought together, held against the heart. Marcus looked at Elena. Elena was already looking at him, her eyes bright, making no effort to hide the brightness. He made the sign back to Lily, slowly and carefully, both hands curved, brought together, held against his chest. She beamed at him with the full, radiant force of a 3-year-old who has successfully communicated something of great cosmic importance. Then she climbed into his lap, and she reached up and patted his face twice with one small hand, the way she did when she wanted his attention, the way she'd been doing since October. The small claiming gesture that he had come to understand was Lily's personal vocabulary for something between "I see you" and "you're mine now." And then she settled in and pointed at the window and began signing something about the snow and Gerald and the sleeping garden and all the flowers that were waiting. Underneath, Marcus sat in the conservatory in January, in the warmth and the green, with a 3-year-old in his lap narrating the winter garden, and Elena beside him, her shoulder against his, her coffee warm in her hands, the whole future of them all sitting in this room. Not promised, not guaranteed. Nothing is ever guaranteed, but present, real, already begun. Outside, the garden slept. In spring it would wake up. The roses would come back, and the lavender, and the marigolds that Lily loved because they were the same yellow as her favorite dress. Gerald would re-emerge from the snow, stoic as ever. The bird bath would fill with rain. And on a Tuesday morning, a billionaire who had built his life around silence would sit in his garden with the woman who had carried her daughter to his gate, and the daughter who had walked through it in yellow, and the garden would hold all three of them, unhurried, undemanding, full of the particular beauty of things that don't require sound to be real. Full of a language they had built together, word by word and sign by sign, one Tuesday morning at a time. The most important language there is. The one that simply says, "I see you. You are not alone. Can I be your friend?" And means, yes. I would like that very much. I would like that for the rest of my life. The end.